There is a specific kind of silence that follows a failure. It is not the peaceful silence of a sleeping house, but the heavy, ringing quiet of a room after a glass has shattered. In that moment, the world feels momentarily suspended, as if the clock has stopped to witness your inadequacy. We are taught to fear this space, the gap between what we intended and what actually occurred. We view failure as a ghost that haunts our potential, a shadow that suggests we are fundamentally broken. But when the mind reacts to failure, it isn't just processing a loss. It is attempting to protect a fragile image of the self. It is a biological and psychological ritual, a frantic effort to reorganize a reality that no longer fits the map we drew. To understand how the mind reacts to failure is to look directly into the mirror of our own vulnerability. The moment of failure is rarely a loud explosion. More often, it is a sudden, cold thinning of the air. It is the email that begins with, "Unfortunately," the stage where the words suddenly evaporate from the tongue, or the project that collapses under the weight of its own ambition. In the seconds that follow, the mind does not immediately reach for logic. It does not look for lessons or silver linings. Instead, it sinks into the primitive. When we fail, the brain's physical response is indistinguishable from physical trauma. The anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for processing the distress of a broken bone or a burn, flares to life. To the mind, a bruised ego is a wounded body. This is the sting, a sharp, localized pang of rejection that radiates outward, numbing the extremities of our confidence. We feel it in the pit of the stomach, a hollow, sinking sensation, as if the center of gravity has shifted just an inch to the left, leaving us unbalanced. In this immediate aftermath, the mind enters a state of hypervigilance. The amygdala, that ancient sentinel of fear, begins to scream. It perceives the failure not as a singular event, but as a threat to our social survival. To the primitive mind, to fail is to be cast out from the tribe. To be wrong is to be vulnerable to the elements. Consequently, the world begins to shrink. The periphery fades, and the focus narrows entirely onto the mistake. The mind becomes a specialized microscope, enlarging the flaw until it occupies the entire field of vision. You are no longer a person who has experienced a setback. In the claustrophobia of the first sting, you are the setback. There is a peculiar sensory shift that occurs here. Time seems to stretch, mocking the error by replaying it in high-definition slow motion. The silence of the room becomes accusatory. Every ticking clock and distant hum feels like a witness to the inadequacy. This is the freeze response. A cognitive paralysis where the prefrontal cortex, the seat of our rational thought, is temporarily hijacked by the emotional brain. We stand in the wreckage, unable to pick up the pieces because the mind is still trying to deny that the vase has broken at all. This chapter of the reaction is marked by a desperate, silent plea for a reset button. The mind frantically searches for a way to undo the last 5 minutes, the last hour, the last year. It is a state of cognitive dissonance where the self we imagined, competent, successful, moving upward, clashes violently with the self that is currently staring at a ruin. This friction generates a heat we call shame. Unlike guilt, which says, "I did something bad," shame whispers, "I am bad." It is a heavy velvet curtain that drops between us and the rest of humanity, convincing us that while everyone else is moving forward in a synchronized dance of achievement, we have stumbled and broken the rhythm. The sting is the most honest part of the failure. It is the raw, unedited reaction of a creature that deeply desires to belong and to excel. It is the sound of the ego's protective casing cracking open. While we spend our lives trying to avoid this specific pain, the sting is also a signal, a brutal, honest reminder that we have dared to put our skin in the game. It is the tax paid for the pursuit of something that mattered. But as the initial shock begins to subside, the mind prepares for its next trick, the long, exhausting search for why. If the first sting of failure is a biological reflex, the lingering ache that follows is a cultural inheritance. To understand why our minds react with such profound devastation to a mistake, we must look backward, not just into our own history, but into the soil from which our sense of self was grown. We are rarely born fearing the fall. A child learning to walk collapses 1,000 times without ever questioning their inherent value. They do not sit on the carpet and contemplate whether they are cut out for bipedalism. But somewhere along the path to adulthood, the mind learns a dangerous equation. Performance equals worth. This is the ancestry of perfection. It often begins in the quiet corridors of childhood, in the way a parent's eyes lit up at a high grade or dimmed at a lost game. We began to collect gold stars, both literal and metaphorical, and in doing so, we unwittingly built a cage. We learned that love and belonging were not unconditional constants, but rewards to be harvested from the fields of achievement. The mind, in its infinite desire to be safe and cherished, became a meticulous architect of a perfect facade. We convinced ourselves that as long as we remained flawless, we remained unassailable. As we grow, this internal narrative is reinforced by a world that treats success as a moral virtue and failure as a character flaw. We live in a society that curates the after photo but hides the during. When our minds react to failure today, they are echoing the whispers of every teacher, coach, and peer who signaled that good was the baseline and great was the only safety. We have inherited a psychological blueprint that views a setback not as an external event, but as a leak in our ship. If the ship leaks, we believe the hull is rotten. This chapter of our internal reaction is characterized by the internalized critic, a voice that sounds suspiciously like the most judgmental person we've ever known. This critic uses the failure as evidence to support a pre-existing case against us. It says, "I knew you weren't enough. I knew it was only a matter of time before they found out." This is the imposter syndrome finding its proof. The mind doesn't just see a failed project, it sees the inevitable collapse of a carefully constructed identity. We are haunted by the ghost of the ideal self, that version of us who never misses a deadline, never says the wrong thing, and never loses. When we fail, that ghost stands over us, a silent reminder of the distance between who we are and who we should have been. Deep within this reaction lies a profound grief for the loss of our own omnipotence. To fail is to admit that we are subject to the laws of reality, that we are limited, and that we cannot control every outcome through sheer force of will. For many of us, this realization is terrifying. If we aren't the masters of our destiny, then we are vulnerable. The mind's intense reaction to failure is often an attempt to mourn the version of our life that existed 5 minutes ago, the life where we were still winning. We carry the weight of generations who survived by being useful and competent. Our ancestors' survival often depended on their status within the group, and that status was tied to their ability to provide, protect, and perform. Our modern minds are still playing by these ancient high-stakes rules. When we fail to land the job or complete the task, the mind reacts as if we have been exiled to the wilderness. It is a lonely, ancestral fear. By recognizing that our reaction to failure is an inherited script, we can begin to see it for what it is, a historical artifact, not a current truth. Once the initial sting has dulled and the echoes of our past have spoken, the mind settles into a more rhythmic, mechanical kind of torture, rumination. This is the neural loop, a state where the brain becomes a record player stuck in a scratched groove. Logically, we know the event is over. The sun has set, the audience has left, and the ink has dried. Yet, internally, the mind continues to simulate the failure with agonizing precision over and over again. This isn't merely a lack of willpower, it is a biological function known as error-related negativity, or ERN. Within milliseconds of making a mistake, the brain produces a specific electrical signal, a blip of recognition that something has gone wrong. In a healthy state, this signal helps us learn and adjust. But when we are gripped by the fear of failure, the ERN doesn't just fire once, it becomes a feedback loop. The brain's error detection center, the anterior cingulate cortex, stays in a state of high alert, constantly scanning the memory of the event for a different outcome. During this phase, the mind engages in what psychologists call counterfactual thinking. We inhabit a mental landscape of if-onlys. If only I had checked that slide one more time. If only I hadn't used that tone of voice. If only I had started a week earlier. We are essentially trying to rewrite the past using the medium of thought. This is an exhausting process because it requires the brain to hold two realities at once, the one that happened and the idealized one that should have happened. The friction between these two worlds consumes massive amounts of cognitive energy, leaving us feeling drained, foggy, and unable to focus on the present. The neural loop is also fueled by the Zeigarnik Effect, the psychological phenomenon where the mind remembers uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. To the brain, a failure is an uncompleted goal. Because we didn't reach the intended finish line, the mind refuses to file the memory away in the finished cabinet. Instead, it leaves the folder open on the desk of our consciousness, insisting that we look at it until we fix it. But since the past cannot be fixed, the mind simply continues to stare, paralyzed by the unresolved data. As the loop continues, it begins to distort the truth. Memory is not a video recording, it is a reconstruction. Each time we replay the failure, the mind, tinted by shame, exaggerates the negative details. The silence after our mistake becomes longer in our memory. The look on a colleague's face becomes more judgmental. The consequences feel more permanent. We are essentially gaslighting ourselves, building a case that this one failure is a definitive map of our future. This repetitive cycle serves a hidden, albeit misguided, purpose. It is a form of worry as protection. The mind believes that if it stays focused on the pain of the mistake, it can prevent it from ever happening again. It is a superstitious logic, the idea that if we punish ourselves enough through rumination, we will somehow earn back our competence. We stay in the loop because, paradoxically, the pain of the regret feels safer than the uncertainty of moving forward. To stop ruminating would be to accept the failure as final, and the mind isn't ready to let go of the control it thinks it gains by obsessing over the why. When the mind can no longer endure the heat of the neural loop, it begins to build. To survive the perceived catastrophe of failure, the psyche constructs a sophisticated network of fortifications. This is the architecture of defense, a set of unconscious maneuvers designed to distance the self from the event. If we cannot undo the failure, the mind decides that it must, at the very least, disown it. The first pillar of this architecture is often rationalization. The mind becomes a creative lawyer, spinning a narrative that shifts the weight of responsibility. We tell ourselves that the goal wasn't that important anyway, or that the system was rigged against us from the start. This isn't simple lying. It is a vital survival mechanism called cognitive dissonance reduction. By devaluing the prize we failed to win, we attempt to dull the pain of the loss. If the grapes were sour, we needn't mourn our inability to reach them. Beyond rationalization lies a more subtle and self-destructive defense, self-handicapping. This is a preemptive strike against the ego. When the mind senses a potential failure on the horizon, it may subconsciously create obstacles, procrastinating, neglecting sleep, or overcommitting to other tasks. If we fail, the mind has a ready-made excuse. I didn't fail because I'm not good enough. I failed because I didn't try, didn't have time. It is a tragic bargain where we sacrifice our chances of success just to protect the illusion of our competence. The mind would rather be seen as lazy or disorganized than as fundamentally incapable. Another wing of this architecture is emotional withdrawal, or the great numbing. When the reaction to failure is too intense, the mind simply pulls the plug on the feeling. We become cynical. We stop caring. We adopt a persona of detached indifference. This is the "I don't give a damn" defense, a thick layer of psychological insulation that prevents anything from getting too close to the core. By refusing to engage deeply with our ambitions, we ensure that failure can never hurt us quite so much again. But in blocking the pain, we also block the light. The architecture that keeps out the sting also keeps out the joy of pursuit. Then, there is projection. The mind, unable to carry the heavy stone of its own inadequacy, flings it at someone else. We become hypercritical of others' mistakes. We find flaws in our partners, our colleagues, or the very people who tried to help us. By pointing out the cracks in everyone else's armor, the mind momentarily forgets the gaping hole in its own. It is a desperate attempt to regain a sense of superiority in a world that feels like it has just demoted us. These defenses are not signs of weakness. They are signs of a mind trying to stay intact. The architecture of defense is a temporary shelter, a place to hide while the storm of failure rages outside. However, the danger lies in staying there too long. If we live in our defenses, we stop growing. We become residents of a fortress, safe from the sting, but isolated from the truth. The mind's reaction here is a preservation tactic, but true healing requires us to eventually step out from behind the walls and look at the wreckage with unshielded eyes.